So the type of hazard depends on the strength of seismic activity, along with such factors as local topographic and built features, subsurface geology, and groundwater. A large earthquake will always be followed by a sequence of aftershocks. So in addition to their impacts on the surface, seismic waves can also have an effect on deep, altering the conditions on fault zones and triggering other earthquakes. The ground motion due to earthquake currents is strongly affected by the earthquake process itself. The propagating path of seismic waves is the topography of the ground surface and the properties of ground surface layers. So these factors cause damage to buildings and other structures in different ways. So the aftershock is any of the several lower magnitude earthquakes that follow the main shock of a larger earthquake. An aftershock results from sudden change in stress occurring within and between rocks, and the previous release of stress brought on by the principal earthquake. Aftershocks also are dangerous because they are usually unpredictable, can be of a large magnitude, and can collapse buildings that are damaged from the main shock. So ground shaking. Ground shaking, if an earthquake generates a large enough shaking intensity. Structures like buildings, bridges, and dams can be severely damaged, and cliffs and sloping grounds destabilize. Perched or stuck objects may fall and injure or worry anyone close by. In the largest earthquakes, whole districts can be devastated by the multiple consequences of ground shaking. So what causes the ground to shake in an earthquake? So earthquakes are usually caused when rock underground suddenly breaks along a fault. This sudden release of energy causes the seismic waves that make the ground shake. When two blocks of rock or two plates are rubbing against each other, it releases friction, and the ground will move, and it will result to ground shaking. We have also the ground rupture. This occurs when ground movement happens on a fault line and breaks through the surface. This may happen in an instant during an earthquake. Slowly the ground cracks and eventually breaks apart. Most of the time, fault rupture follows pre-existing faults, known as zone of weakness. Structures that are built exactly on the fault or along the span of the fault are likely to experience severe damage and thus have higher disaster risk. So, kung napapansin nyo dyan sa image, yung bahay na nakalocate mismo sa zone of weakness ay magkakaroon ng malaking pinsala. Ayan, no? So, malapit nang mahulog yung bahay sa kinatatayuan nito. So, in general, ground rupture may be caused by one reason: surface rupture along faults, either as a primary rupture on the seismogenic fault or as a sympatic rupture, secondary movement on shallow faults, or shaking-induced compaction of natural deposits in sedimentary basins and river valleys. So kung napapansin nyo, yung mga infrastructure na malapit mismo or nasa gitna or nasa tabi mismo ng ilog ay makakaranas ng matinding pagguho ng lupa or rupture tinatawag. Kasi they are saturated with water, no? With saline water. Yung malalapit sa ilog or sa mga lake. No, pag saturated yung lupa ng tubig, sabihin weak yung klase ng lupa na kinatatayuan ng isang bahay or isang infrastructure. We have also the liquefaction. This occurs when seismic shaking causes lost materials in the soil to mix with the groundwater or soil saturated with water. Eventually, the soil behaves like a quicksand. It has lost its strength to hold and support objects. So, yung quicksand, yung kagaya ng mga mud soil, no? Quicksand. So, in effect, the structures on the ground slowly sink. Liquefaction hazard is difficult to detect early on because the surface of the soil or even the layers several meters below it may appear to be solid bedrock. So, kaya nga nagkakaroon tayo ng geological or what we call this geotechnical survey sa foundation ng isang building para ma-make sure kung gaano kalalim yung magiging foundation or excavation, no? Kung gaano kalalim yung excavation. So, para makasigurado tayo na yung building natin ay can withstand the force of earthquake, kailangan naka-attach mismo yung foundation ng building natin sa bedrock. So, we can also use Kaisun foundation or what we call this the floating foundation. So, those two types of foundation that I have mentioned, the Kaisun foundation or the pile foundation and the floating foundation, are used to make sure that our foundation of our building or infrastructure can withstand the forces of earthquakes or the ground movements. It can also withstand the force of storm surge or landslides or flood. No? So for our image, soil liquefaction is the characteristic of soil that can affect the stability of a building. A building can stand erect if this soil is stable, and a building can tilt or sink if the soil is not stable or soil stability and declines. So make sure that your building's foundation are located or attached to a bedrock. A bedrock is a type of soil or layers of soil that has a strong, compact grains of soil or rocks held together. So, make sure na iwasan natin yung mga soil na may poor spaces that are filled with water. Yan yung tinatawag nating saturated na klase ng lupa or saturated soil because they have the poor spaces that are filled with water. So shaking has destabilized the soil by increasing the space between the grains. So pag merong what we call this confined or hollow portion of the ground, magkakaroon ng mabilis na pag-tilt or pag-sink ng isang building. So the soil will eventually flows like a liquid. Parang lulutang lang siya, no? At lulubog. Kakaroon ng pagguho. So we will proceed for a tsunami. So tsunami are long wavelength oceanic waves generated by sudden displacement of seawater by shallow earthquakes, volcanic eruption, or submarine landslides. So what is it like to face a tsunami? So this explains that in shallow earthquakes, it also triggers tsunamis when the seismic activity causes the land along fault lines to move up or down. As you can see in our image, we have the um, earthquakes that trigger a tsunami. When part of the seafloor shift vertically, either becoming raised or lowered, entire water columns become displaced. This creates a wave of energy which propels the water. As you can see, we have the earthquake that trigger the movement of the sea floor and creates a wave. So during eruption of volcanoes can also cause a tsunami. Volcanoes that are located under the oceans. So volcanic tsunamis can be caused by underwater explosion and shock waves caused by large explosions. Even ones that occur above the waterline, shock waves coupling with sea waves can produce tsunamis up to 3 meters in height. So a number of waves may be produced and they can travel long distance at high speeds to flood far off shores. So the height of a tsunami varies and may be affected by the sea floor, depth and shape, and other factors. New Zealand is susceptible to tsunamis originating from the distant source around the Pacific Ring of Fire, as well as from very close to our coastline. Near source tsunamis will allow for very little warning. So tsunamis could resemble a wall of water, or more likely a rapidly rising flood. It's not going to look like big, curling waves like you see at the beach. It's really a very turbulent flow that is rising and flowing onto the land quickly. So how a tsunami forms? This image will tell us how. No? At the first scenario, the tectonic upthrust in the form of earthquakes and ocean floor volcanoes cause vast quantities of water to be displaced in a very short space of time. So sa mga seconds lang, no, it can generate a massive amount of energy, yung tectonic plates. Yung sa tectonic plates, alam natin, dyan yung iba't ibang klase ng fault lines. So, the next scenario, the energy from the quake or impulsive causes of train of simple progressive oscillatory waves. So, it can produce what we call this the wave train, no? A series of waves to propagate over the ocean surface in ever widening the circles at speed as fast as 500 miles per hour. Napakabilis ng speed niya, ang wave. So the third scenario, the travel. The wavelengths of the tsunami continue to grow with the waves. Periods are the length of time for successive press or throw past a single point, varying from 5 minutes to more than an hour. Next, number 4 scenario, the approach. As the tsunami waves approach the coastline, so kung malapit na siya sa coastline, no, sa seashore of a landmass, they are slowed dramatically. So, meron ng slowing arrangement of waves pag nakarating na siya sa coastline. So, by the friction of their collision with the rising seabed. So, yung seabed natin, mas thicker siya na naka-locate mismo dun sa coastline. Kaya nagkakaroon siya ng slow movement. As the velocity lessens, however, the wavelengths become shortened and amplitude also increases. So, the last scenario, finally, with the wavelength compressed and the height tend to large levels, often between 5 and 10 meters, the giant waves collide with the shore, causing massive damage. The succeeding outflow of water then continue the destruction, uprooting trees and washing away people and property. So, yung first wave niya, yun yung first or yung main impact ng tsunami. At pagkatapos niyan, dadalhin ka niya papuntang dagat. Yung una, hampasin ka muna niya ng alon. After that, dadalhin ka niya sa dagat. Napaka-delikado talaga ng tsunami.